Hi Divya,
Hi, Deepa.
welcome to the Wise Wednesday. We are doing season 2, episode 4, and I just cannot wait to tell our audience about your book, The Company We Keep, which is on a very interesting part of what we call organization culture, corporate culture, and you have done a mean job at putting out so many themes with such your very classic punchlines which I can mark out and say, these are the 2 3 lines that should, kind of pull out and create some communication or some things that people should write down and keep. So I am so delighted to have you, Divya, on this
Thank you
show.
so much, Deepa. I'm delighted for this chance to talk to you.
2019, Divya, you remember we met and you
Yes,
had this idea of
yes,
doing the book. And I remember us, talking, and you had this idea about how you wanted to do a research-based
right.
book on this topic. So, maybe you should tell our audience a little bit about where research fits in your life. Why is that piece important to you?
Okay. So, actually, writing was something I always wanted to do because I loved reading. So, it's that classic thing of a child, saying, "Oh, I love this author and I love this book, and I wish I could also write something like that." And as you grow up, everybody thinks they can write and that it's easy, and I discovered it is not. And also because I got into advertising and I was more on the planning side of it. I got into advertising by chance because I wanted to be in creative, and then I did an MBA. Then people said you can't really be creative if you've done an MBA, and so I got into client servicing. But from a very early on, I got a lot of exposure to research, and I just love that part of the work so much. Because I'm very very attracted to stories. That's part of why I like to read so much. But meeting people and hearing their stories one on one is just I just enjoyed that part of the job so much, and especially because I love it when I learn something I don't know. So there's so many misconceptions you have when you see a pen picture of a consumer and you say this is their socio-economic background, this is what they do, and this is what their family is like, this is what their life is. You make all these assumptions about them, but when you go and meet them, it's actually quite different, and you really have to let go of a lot of your own preconceived biases and opinions before you can actually understand what is their life. So that actually was the part of my job that I really enjoyed a lot. And in 2018, when I started feeling this burnout and decided I wanted to take a break, and I cover this in my book as well, that it's while I really wanted and needed the break, there was this little fear in the back of my mind that will I be able to get back? What will happen to my career? So I didn't want to just take a break where I'm just doing nothing. And so I said, okay, I always wanted to write. What if I pursue that for a little while and see how it goes? And so I started trying to study, and I attended a writing workshop, which really helped me, learn how to work on that. But when it came to the book, I had a lot of fiction ideas, but I didn't really have the confidence. And somewhere I didn't want to lose the connect to my work. And research is always something that I've enjoyed. So when I started asking myself all these questions about, why did I burn out, and is it so, it's very easy, initially to say, oh, I'm the victim and somebody did this to me. But as you start the process of healing and recovery, you realize a lot of things actually I did to myself, and nobody really came out and did anything to me. And so while I was asking these questions and saying, where did I go wrong? What did I understand properly? I thought the best way to answer it was research, because that is what I used to do in my earlier job. If we had a question about the consumer, we would go out and meet that consumer and answer it through research. We didn't sit in a room by ourselves and try to make it up. And I felt, that going back to research would again be something that would be therapeutic for me, because I would learn from people who have probably figured out things that I haven't.
And this is so 360-degree treatment that you've given this book, Divya. So it's your personal experience. Then you've got
Mm.
experts who you brought on
Right.
to be part of this project: HR, wellness, uh, psychotherapists, people in marketing, in leading businesses.
Mm.
Then you've got the qualitative piece. You've also done online surveys with from
Mm.
LinkedIn, and you've pieced it all together. So when you were sort of at the planning stage of doing this book, if you can tell us how, what some things were, some things organic, or, because COVID happened, I think, in the middle of your writing process. So I'm
Right.
especially curious to know what did things pivot in some way for you?
Yeah. So actually, now that the book is out, like, all our communication campaigns and all that we worked on, now we can package it and make it a nice case study, which looks clean and clutter free. But the truth is, it's not that simple. I wish I had the foresight to have planned it this way, but actually, it was quite organic. So, initially, you would remember my initial discussions were pretty inarticulate because I wanted research to answer the questions rather than answer them myself. I was very clear that if I write a book just with my opinion, it's going to be a never-ending rant, and I will learn nothing. I just wanted to kind of, understand where I went wrong or understand what I could have done better, and learn from other people. So when I did ultimately I had to find people who could kind of be comfortable with that open-endedness. And I realized also I wrote the early version of my book proposal was also pretty bad, and nobody could really understand because I had not done the research yet. So until I did the research and actually started writing, it was very hard for me to explain what my vision was, because I myself didn't know what would come out of the research, and I wanted to keep my mind open. I didn't want to go in with preconceived notions, because then I would just know more of the same thing that I've already, which I know has not worked. So so actually it ended up happening step by step. So first I did the writing workshop, then I realized that actually I need to do the research and start the book. I can't sell a proposal for a book that I have no clue where it's going. And so then I did the research, and the fieldwork was in October 2019. And by the time we got the research report, the lockdown had started and COVID had hit. And then, while I took the first couple of months when it was a really complete lockdown, I was struggling like everybody was to figure out what is going on. So I didn't immediately start writing. But when I did start writing, I realized that COVID is actually changing a lot of things for us. And I didn't know whether it was temporary, whether it was permanent, how much of the changes of COVID we are going to carry forward. I think we still don't know that very clearly. But then I realized that I needed to do more research, and at that time, online surveys were the best way. Luckily for me, this target audience is very easy to connect to, and they're very, very open to helping, to being candid in these kind of conversations, as long as they are assured of anonymity. So the research was necessary. And actually, like I said, it just evolved because of the situation. It's not something that I had planned quite this way. It just worked out.
Wonderful. In the book, in addition to corporate culture, at every stage you link it to Indianness. You bring in a sociological, cultural angle, our psyche. The way we think of competition, the way you talk about the caste system, and it's the. I think being a planner, you get that sort of. You make it seem effortless, Divya, but I want to tell you that's so enjoyable, and it kind of unravels not just for an Indian audience, but for anybody who's trying to even understand the Indian mindset. I think your book has so many nuggets, and how did you go through that exploration? Were these sort of how were these insights coming to you? Tell us a little bit about that discovery. The caste system, for instance, was such a beautiful parallel. You talk of hierarchy, you talk about the need for structure. I'm
Right.
talking too much, unlike what I do at other, because I'm just so overwhelmed and so excited with this book.
Yeah. So actually, I have to give a lot of credit to the team at Quantum. Deepa, research is always a collaborative process. And while I enjoy research a lot, I'm certainly not an expert in that. So I did rely very heavily on them. And I have to say that Indianness kind of crept up on me because, my hypothesis going in, and this is the hypothesis that I got totally wrong. As friends, a lot of my background. I grew up with, in this kind of family that has been kind of rootless. So for 4 generations we've been nuclear families. Nobody has really lived in the place where they grew up. So we have there's very little in my family which is a ritual or something that is something that we do and that I can point to and say this is Indian about me. And because my father was in Unilever when I was born, and he was there for a large part of my life, I actually thought corporate culture was one thing and I thought Indian culture was another thing. So I actually went in with this hypothesis that maybe corporate culture is something we adopt and we kind of use it to shed our Indianness. And the research showed me that actually I was quite wrong about it, and that the way corporate culture has evolved has actually evolved because of our Indianness.
Fabulous. You also spent some time growing up in the US. You've done, you did your MBA in IIM Bangalore, and then you went to advertising. You are so in a sense, you're a medley yourself. You're
Yes.
almost a mosaic, I can say, of different experiences, and all of that. You said, has sort of has come to be in this book. Am I right?
Yes. Actually, I think this book was also like a question, like an outcome of that medley, because I think a lot of times, anything that we're going through, we're always asking who am I and why am I like this, and where is it coming from? And when I started studying corporate culture, it really helped me understand the way that I would approach work, or the way that I would, uh, would kind of, patterns that we have in terms of communication, in terms of, accepting authority or following authority or rebelling against authority. All of that actually plays a role in who we are, and we bring all of that to work. No matter how much we think, oh, we are wearing the good clothes, and we are being professional, some part of our personality does leak into it, and our background. And I thought it was interesting to know, because these are things that we don't have time to reflect on and introspect while we are in that situation. So I think, like, this process has been very, very therapeutic for me.
So Divya, you talk about, when 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 you started thinking about it, it was I think in 2019 there was the victim that was dominant in your mind, because you had been so battered through what the corporate culture had done to you, is what you believed. And then I think that realization to say that every person has a choice.
Hmm.
Uh, when did that come, and how did that evolve? Was it post the research? Was it through your own inner work and reflections?
So Subway Deepa, I didn't I knew that I had a choice, so like I got into advertising out of choice, and I had other choices. I was very much advised against getting into advertising when I got into it. But yeah, I knew, I was very, very conscious of the fact that it was my choice. And I think, somewhere that was also driving me. When you make a choice and you stand against people, then you want it to be validated and vindicated even more. So sometimes you're driving, it's an internal drive. And I think I've always been aware that I've been very internally motivated, so a lot of things I do for my own reasons, and not necessarily because somebody has pushed me to do it. But yeah, I still have my compulsions, and there is that culture does play a role. No matter how much I think I might have been untouched by the culture, I'm not completely untouched. So yeah, it's very, very interesting to know that. And I do feel that there are still a lot of things that we don't say our choice. A lot of times when we are unable to make a decision, we kind of go with whatever, okay, now what choice do I have? Somebody else makes that choice first, and we just go along with it because, we're too tired, or we are too scared, or we are afraid of kind of asserting ourselves. We're afraid of any conflict that might come up. So it just becomes easier to do the done thing rather than to, fight for something different, which we are not at all sure about.
Also, was it tempting at a point in time to bring the gender lens and talk about women, and then say, no, no, I'm going to just stay with people, men, women in the workforce? So, did you go through that as well?
Yeah, actually, I think almost everybody I spoke to would always bring the gender lens into it. So it's not something, in fact, that's something that I really realized, that, gender can't completely be ignored. So I have kind of tried to cover it in my book. But I also feel that if I'm looking at culture, you always try to look at the macro view first, and I feel like I feel somewhere when it's very, very micro, then it becomes very personal, and then it's about an individual person and what is available to them and what they can do. But if we want to kind of change the system, or we want to change policies, then you have to take a more macro view of it. The micro view may not be enough, and I think both points of view are important. So I just decided I wanted to start macro first.
At what stage were you getting, a sense that you want to write to Penguin, or, reach out to publishers? At what stage did you do that?
So honestly, Deepa, when I started writing the proposal, even before I did the research, because like a typical planner, I was doing my whole homework about publishing and how it works, and I felt that if I write a book like this, the my basic objective was to get published. And yes, I was very, very happy to get Penguin on board. But I think in the beginning it was like any publisher will do, just as long as somebody is willing to publish my book. So I looked at all the options and everything, and then I was very, very lucky because I managed to get in touch with a fantastic network of people who are themselves authors or themselves in publishing, and they were extremely generous in terms of their time and their advice. So a lot of people looked at my proposals, a lot of people helped me reach out to people, and actually, it's very strange, but through a network of contacts from my father and Mr. Sandeep Ghosh, who's a good friend of his, I actually managed. Penguin was the first publisher I sent my proposal to, and it just happened that they liked it and they took it on board. So till date, I can't believe my luck that it happened that way. But honestly, Penguin was like my dream thing. But I was quite prepared to send out the proposal a lot of times, and handle rejection if I needed to.
So now, as the chapters were evolving and unfolding, did you also go through the process of rewriting some chapters? Did you get that? What kind of feedback were you getting from the editors?
Yeah, so actually, Deepa, before I even went, like my first 5 chapters, I published on LinkedIn as articles before I sent the proposal to Penguin. So I got a lot of feedback through LinkedIn, but even what I published on LinkedIn, I went through several drafts. So each of my chapters was written one at a time, lots of drafts. Every time somebody gave me an input, I shared it with all my experts. So my experts were actually part of my writing process. It's not just the chapters that they've written at the end, but they were actually part of every chapter as it was evolving. So I have like multiple drafts of each and every chapter, and then by the time I submitted the book to Penguin. I think I submitted like a quarter of it at a time. Then my editor would give me some feedback, and also I kind of had I had a little like a unofficial panel of people to just read the book and tell me how it's reading, and is it making sense, and is there something they agree with or don't agree with. So yeah, multiple rewrites, and even after I submitted the final draft to Penguin, I think I was also constantly doing surveys because I wanted to know how COVID changed things. I didn't want to just stick to what was the initial research, but I wanted to kind of update it by the time it got published.
So tell us which were the chapters that really stand out for you as the ones that even if they had to be like essays or things that you had to write as just single chapters. And there is a flow there. So there's cultural undercurrents, lifestyle compensations and compulsions, the corporate life cycle, and expert reflection. So that's the 4 buckets that Divya has in her book. And in each of these 5 chapters that you have, there is
Hmm.
a thread that runs through. Of course, I must reveal the
Hmm.
first book that I got from
Hmm.
my pre-order. I already gave it away to
Hmm.
somebody I thought really needed it. So, I got the sense as I was reading just
Hmm.
the first chapter or the foreword. I literally started from the very first word.
Hmm.
That this book can be a great gift,
Hmm.
and anybody who sort of talks about even a chance conversation that they're feeling in some way a struggle in their workplace ought to read it, because it gives you a sort of a larger view, and it kind of moves you away from your own autobiography. So I thought this is a good way to sort of distance yourself from the problem and get insights to reflect on what one is, the situation one is. So I see myself getting a lot more copies, Divya, from
Thank you,
people
Deepa.
that I.
That's so kind of you. I'm glad that it's working that way.
So, which was the chapter that you personally think has, is 1 or 2 chapters that are your personal favorites? Is that a fair question? Even I don't even know that.
Actually, I think all of the chapters, each and every one, I think I learned a lot. But I think the chapter which, like, you brought up gender earlier. I think the gender chapter was one which I really, really worked on because I wanted to be very objective. And as a
Mm-hmm.
woman, it's very, very easy for me to see the woman's point of view. And
Yeah.
but I remember, I always had this strange dichotomy when I was working, where on one hand, I worked in an industry which was full of women, so I never had that thing where I was outnumbered, or that I was the only woman. That never happened to me. Yet at the same time, there was always this pressure that as a woman I had something to prove. Like I remember the first time I got to hire somebody who would report into me, I was told very clearly, don't hire a woman. And I said, why? And I was told, but they have problems staying late in the night, and you have to worry about their safety, and then they'll have family. And I was like, but I'm a woman and I've done all of that. And the sad thing is that, as a woman, yes, I would like to go home and I would like to meet my family and all of that, but why shouldn't a man want the same thing? So it's I really worked hard on that to kind of see the man's point of view. And I think it's the fact is that, especially in urban India and in corporate India, I feel that it's the man's voice that is not being heard. Because as women we recognize all of the issues, and we've learned to fight and assert ourselves over these things, the things that are issues for us. But somewhere, like within the, we focused a lot on the corporate world and said about how it is so, in the corporate world a woman has to kind of prove herself. She has to work twice as hard, and she has to do this, and she may not get the same salary, and all of that. But at home, a woman has a very, very strong foundation. At home, nobody questions that the woman is the most indispensable person. And so how does it feel for a man when his mother tells him that, oh, as long as your wife and your sister are there, it's okay if you are not there in the family function? You're almost being told you're superfluous, just go and keep working and bring us the money. I'm not saying it's that cut and dry, but there is a component to that. Why shouldn't they want to be with the family, and why shouldn't they want to look after anybody who needs looking after? Why shouldn't they want to spend time with their children?
Yeah.
And that flexibility that we talk about, and especially now that there are more nuclear families, I think, at home people work as partners. And I saw that even in when I interviewed the respondents, actually, they really had especially the married couples, they really had the personal lives very sorted. Their roles and expectations were very clear. They had figured it out between the two of them. And, if the husband and wife have decided a certain balance works for them, I don't think anybody else has the right to question why this and why that, right? So, I just felt that why can't it be like that at work as well? Where if you're working in a team, if you're working in a department, if you're working in an organization, where you decide, how to play to your strengths, and you give equal opportunities to everybody. Just because you're a man doesn't mean you have to sit the whole night in the office and work, right? You should also go home, and you should also look after your health, and you should also be with your family.
You have a chapter on validation and purpose.
Mhm.
Again, this whole thing of external markers. And
Yes.
there are two things that strike me. One, early on, you said that you have a strong inner locus of
Mhm.
control and direction. But on the other hand, you became a workaholic in those 20 years.
Mhm.
What was happening over there? And is it possible for this sort of a dichotomy where you are not necessarily looking for external validation, but still your purpose is all linked to your work, and
Mhm.
uh, workaholism then sort of
Mhm.
sets in and creeps in and sort of takes over your
Right.
well-being.
Right. So I think for me, the issue was that, work, I found work therapeutic. I enjoyed it more than I enjoyed other things. And so maybe I got a little, too invested. But also I feel that, at the end of the day, no matter how internally driven you are, you do look at external markers for validation, right? So, because how do I know I'm doing a good job? If my boss is not happy with my work, or my client is not happy with my work, I can't tell myself I'm doing a good job. And beyond the point, when things are very, very busy and all of that, you also look at things like salaries, you look at perks, you look at the kind of designations you have, and all of those are seen as a measure of, am I doing well, am I not doing well? It's like the child with the report card, right? When I get an A, or I'm somewhere in the top ranks of the class, I can say, oh, I'm intelligent and I do well in studies. But you need that data to support even your internal views.
Mhm.
And I think it's very, very rare people, and maybe I don't even know if it's possible for somebody to say, despite all the external data, I'm still doing better than everybody else thinks. I don't think that's possible.
Also, you primarily looked at advertising through the advertising experience, but in your book, you've got uh, large companies, Indian companies, you've covered startups. So you've got the whole spectrum covered over there from the work culture point of view, lest anyone thinks that this is, really a problem with advertising, that work-life balance and corporate culture being difficult and uh, late nights being the norm, etc. So was that again a very deliberate a plan to sort of make this very holistic and go beyond your personal experience?
Yes, Deepa, because advertising as an industry is in a little kind of a unique situation, and somewhere we are on the edge of the corporate spectrum, right? Like, because there are a lot of things that are said and done in a corporate world which are not done in smaller companies and smaller agencies, and definitely not in advertising. But there is a common, so I was actually trying to find that what is the common thread, because we say culture, but what is culture actually? If it's a religious culture or social religious culture, there are books, like if I'm a Hindu, I can look at the Gita or the Vedas or the Upanishads and say that is, there is some guideline there. Or as a Christian, I can look at the Bible and say, okay, there's something for me to review and say, okay, there are rules put down, and then I interpret those rules to how they apply to my life. But I don't know any company and I don't know any industry which has a written set of guidelines like that, right? So, what is it that we are so sure that this is the culture, but how are we sure? Who is telling us that? So, I didn't want to
So in
leave
a
it
sense,
on advertising.
yeah, absolutely. Also, you they talk about the pressure cooker, and it was very interesting because in 2013, uh, when we were 17 years old and we had a transformation coach working with us, we did workshops, and in every group, when people had to articulate how what's working and what's not working, the what's not working, all of the three groups had the picture of a pressure cooker. Even in Lumière, where we talk of flexibility, and so uh, for me that was an eye opener, because I always assumed that there is flexibility, people work in teams, we've disaggregated certain tasks so everybody's not burdened, and people are really encouraged to balance. So, and then you talk about this good stress, just right. So even it was very interesting for me to discover that aspect, and then I realized it had a lot to do also with my personality. So the bad habits of the founder and the leader become the bad habits of the organization. So a lot of the transformation work was a transformation work that I was doing on myself as a person and as a leader. So it's leaders, and when they say people don't leave companies, people leave bosses. I think this is what uh, it is, isn't it, Divya?
Yes. I think, Deepa, it's about that environment that you create, and also you have to remember that a lot of people come with their own perceptions of authority. So there are people who feel comfortable challenging a boss, and there are people who, even if they know their boss will agree with them, will be very tongue tied and very afraid to open their mouth. So a lot of it comes from whatever their family structures were, how they were brought up, whether they were allowed to kind of question authority or not. And it also depends on what is the leader's openness, and the fact is that it is a cultural uh, thing, that if across the research. And what I found interesting was that when we are at work, it's only you share these stories only with your very very close personal friends. You don't really share this with your friends at work, because you're kind of afraid that it might kind of get around, and it might kind of come back and bite you, and you're very afraid to share things like that. And yet,
Mm.
when you talk to people, everybody has that same story to tell. So I don't know how many of the stories in my book are actually so new or so different. But what is interesting is that how pervasive that experience is. So I wouldn't put all the blame on the founder or the leader or anything like that. But yes, they do play a role in terms of helping people, because if I feel my boss is open to listening to me, and with some people, the boss will have to work extra hard to get them to say, how you do at research, right? You have a respondent who's very very open and very willing to talk, and you have to just ask a few basic questions, and that person will tell you everything. And then there are some respondents who are so reticent and so shy that you really have to work hard to kind of pull the truth out of them. So I feel sometimes, and maybe leaders don't even have the time to do that, because they are also in that pressure cooker.
You also talk, it's a very, this whole area of reflection that you talk about, that people oftentimes don't even have the time and the space to reflect. And that's what the lockdown did. It gave people some time to reflect. I thought that's a very important and a very telling part in the book. Maybe you want to just talk about that.
Yes. In fact, Deepa, I've realized this whole process has taught me one thing. The biggest lesson that I've learned is that I'm cognitively lazy. It is so easy to just say, okay, somebody will make a timetable and then I'll just stick to this timetable day after day. Because every day to decide, to wake up and decide and say, I'll do this and then I'll do this and then I'll do this, it's so much easier to follow. That's how we've also been brought up, right? In school, we had a timetable. In college, we had some sort of a timetable. You go to business schools, they teach you to work through the night and, make things happen even when it seems impossible. And then you go to work and, you're just perpetuating more of the same. And somewhere when you're very, very busy and everything is very hectic around you and there's a lot of pressure, the last thing that you feel comfortable doing is to, take a pause, take a break, and say, okay, you know what, I'm going to think it through before I do something. The pressure to act is so strong. And then there's also a little bit of a short term view. In this moment, I just need to do this and get out of here. Whereas if I sit and think about it, maybe, if I don't act now, in the long term, it might be better than doing something wrong now. But we don't always have the luxury for that. So I felt that, part of the reason why I was cognitively lazy is because I felt, I was putting so much into the things I needed to do now, that I didn't have the bandwidth left to kind of sit and, think about things in the future. And, it just kind of, I felt like I was, that hamster in the wheel where I'm just running and running and running and I can't think beyond my next step. I know I'm never going to get off this wheel. I want to get off this wheel, but I have no idea because all I know is to put my next foot forward. So I
It's
feel
what
that
Stephen Covey talks
yes,
about as the quadrant two activities, important but not urgent. And we kind of
yes,
put those on hold if we
yes.
don't have that
Yes, and
pause.
as planners, like this the irony of it, that in marketing and advertising and market research, we look at consumers and we develop these frameworks to help us understand them better. But do we have the time and the patience and the effort to kind of use them to understand ourselves better? So we just know, oh, I'm burnt out or I'm unhappy or I'm unhealthy or this has happened or that has happened. And we are upset. And sometimes you don't know why you're upset because you don't have the time to think why you're upset. You just want to push it down and move forward. I think I did that a lot.
So, Divya, I think we can go on this conversation, but I really want you to tell the reader three reasons why they ought to get their own copy of the company we keep.
Yeah. So I think the first is that if you are at all curious about how other people are managing their lives and their careers or what is happening, whether your individual experiences are universal and other people are going through the same thing, I think that is one part of it. The second part of it is that, I'm sure everybody has some thoughts, some feelings, some decisions to make about their lives and their careers. And hopefully, this will give you some information. The introspection and the reflection and the choices, that work you still have to do. But if you want information, you'll get that in this book. And the third reason I would say is that, the part of the book that I have not written, the parts that are written by the experts, I think those give a little bit more direction. And I would definitely recommend that, for business people, the HR perspective, the leadership perspective, the workspace design perspective will be very interesting, but they won't be completely new. What will be completely new is the psychological perspective. And I would really urge you to pay special attention to that chapter because it kind of explains how and where we are coming from and why in certain situations we are just not able to be rational. So I think that is a very, very critical reason to buy the book.
Thank you, Divya. And last but not the least, the title and the book cover, both very interesting, very well composed, created, and designed.
Thank you so much, Deepa. I have to thank the Penguin team for this because I was a complete novice and they kind of handled all of this.
They've done a great job.
Yes, they have. Thank you.
And compliments to, I think, your team that did the research and the experts that guided you through the process and everyone who's given feedback for the
Yes.
book. Thank you
Yes.
so much for making this book available for the Indian corporate community and those who are aspiring to get into the corporate world.
Thank you so much, Deepa.